Does he really?
Yeah. So you want to give the test phrase?
Sure. Okay, so we're going to talk about OSUNY, the history, how it got started, particular events of interest, the people who were involved with it.
Okay.
Throughout the years, its purpose, the people involved with it.
Okay. And let me see.
So as I talk to you, talk to the camera.
Whatever you'd like. The way it's currently shot, it'll have this kind of distant, far away look that's kind of cute in its own way.
Okay. Will it look strange if I'm looking at you? Okay.
There are. If I was doing a documentary that had 12 subjects, I would probably be extremely anal, setting things up, perfect thing every time, make sure they all mesh perfectly because they're going to be switched between. But when it's 240 interviews, it's everywhere. People, it's nighttime, it's daytime, people are talking, there's stuff going on in the background. Forget it. So if I get some variety, hey, this is actually an unusual shot for me.
Sure.
So people, and they go, why wasn't there more of those?
Right.
So, your history with BBS seems to actually come very close to its dawn.
Yeah, it was pretty early on. There wasn't much out there in terms of BBSs or even BBS software, which is part of why I ended up writing my own, which I think we used for years, for 3 years probably. But yeah, definitely.
Well, you know what year you think you first bumped into them?
Yeah, it was in, I think, 82. The origin of OSUNY was, it was spurred by a meeting of the Ohio Scientific Users Group of New York, which is what OSUNY stands for. And Ohio Scientific was a company that made computers. I had one, and so we had this users group, and it met every month, and all these computer nerds would go down there, and we'd meet and we'd talk about it. And well, back then, I mean, if you had a 300 baud modem, that was like something really amazing, you know, having a modem, period. So we went to this users group meeting, and in the discussions, we decided it would be great to have a BBS for the users group. Turned out no one really had a computer they could use for it. Only one person had a modem, and we talked about it, and I said, well, you know, I would do it with my machine, but I don't have a modem. Well, another guy in the group, he worked for AT&T, and he said, hey, I can get you a 1200 baud modem, 1200 baud modem. And so next time he brought it in, and that was kind of the beginning of OSUNY. I think it used our BBS software to start with, and it was well, at least the implementation I used was relatively poor. It was one of the very first BBS packages out there. It was free. I downloaded it from someplace in upstate New York and modified it a little bit, but people still called up, and turned out no one else in the Ohio Scientific group really had a modem, so they didn't call up, but other people called up, and some hackers kind of started to put some information on there, phone phreaks mainly. There were a couple of people early on, Milo Phone Bill and Tom Tone. They were a couple of the early ones, and Mr. America also. So I got to know these people, and a little bit at a time. It started mostly with phone phreaking, because that's what was accessible to most people and useful. You know, hey, I can, you know, call across the country or across the world without having to pay for it. There were not many alternative long-distance carriers then. In fact, I don't know that they had really started much outside of, there's MCI and Sprint. Later on, ITT, which then became WorldCom, which is now MCI. They were on the scene. But there were these things called extenders, where you dial an 800 number, punch in the number that you wanted to call, and then a code. And some of them only had like 3-digit codes or something. And the call would go through. So that was kind of how OSUNY got started and how it attracted its initial crowd.
So, in fact, I mean, why did you keep the name OSUNY then?
It earned a reputation, and I was still using this 1200 baud modem on loan from the club. So I kind of felt this obligation, well, I have to call it that. And also, I was a little wary about, well, some of this stuff is illegal, and I need to have some kind of front for it, I suppose. I mean, you dialed up, and it said Ohio Scientific Users Group of New York, and I ran the thing, and I was just known as SYSOP. I rarely used a pseudonym. When I did, it was Paul Snyder. But usually I was just SYSOP, OSUNY BBS. And people came to me, and all of our communication was done on my board. So that was kind of my presence to the world.
What I consider to be one of the first text files, the black box, the file starts out to all who dare, the black box. That seems to originate from OSUNY.
Yeah.
Now, what inspires somebody, I mean, where does this idea of text files come from?
Oh, I remember that. Yeah, well, I realized that there were people who had these ideas for building things. Like, well, and you'd read about it like that. And I was like, well, why don't we just have like a little text file area? And we might have just called it text files or something like that, because you didn't have things like downloads back then. And when someone would write something up, we would post it there. And that's how we got things like the black box and the blue box, and tips on phone phreaking, and various people who were really involved with the BBS. They'd write stuff, and it was a great forum to exchange that information. Anyone who called up could access it.
I mean, a lot of that stuff persists to the present day. In fact, some of it is almost canon. It's almost a requirement that if you have your collection of info files, even if the most recent ones are how to hack AOL Instant Messenger, and
Right.
how to get around GeoCities content restriction, right next to it they'll have something from Mr. America.
Right.
Any thoughts on that?
Well, in a lot of ways, it was a foundation of phone phreaking, I guess. There was the black box, which was so easy to build. Anyone could build one of those. Then there was the blue box, which was quite a bit tougher to build. But if you built one, you could, in some sense, play telephone operator. Mr. America was the one who put together that text document, and I edited it, I think. Trying to remember where he got the design from.
Possibly from Tab?
Maybe. He might, as I think about it, he might have actually originated that design. It was kind of funny. I mean, you'd never think this of someone whose reputation goes on, but he lived in a tenement in Harlem, Washington Heights, actually. And I'd go down to visit him in his apartment sometimes, and he had all this great electronics stuff around because he was into electronics. And I think he came up with that design. He knew the frequencies that were needed, and something which was never publicized on the BBS was that this was kind of a side business for him. He worked for Control Data Corporation. I don't think they're around anymore, but they made mainframes, and huge disk drives, things like that. Anyway, he had this side business where he would build blue boxes, and he would basically sell them to people as, hey, you can make free phone calls. You just take this thing and you push this button, which he had wired up for 2600, and then you punch in these other buttons and hit this key, and your call will go through. And these aren't phone freaks. These are just like people off the street or people he worked with or whatever who want to make free phone calls. So I'm thinking that really inspired him initially to come up with this design. And I mean, obviously he didn't originate the frequencies or discover them on his own. I don't know where he got them, but I think he probably came up with a circuit. And you could build them, you could take an old calculator, strip out the guts and build it into one. So that was something I remember doing. But anyway, so he put together the text file. Based on that, there might have been a few changes, just a few refinements to it, but overall it remained in its original form.
Now, did you have, we're going to skip around, when you ultimately passed OSUNY off,
Yeah.
did you expect that it would, even if you're being harsh on its, what constitutes working, OSUNY definitely continues to function for another nearly 15 years. Did you expect it would have that kind of longevity when you passed it off?
No idea. Honestly, when I started it, I was 16. I was in high school. I was a computer hacker and a phone freak in days when people didn't know about this stuff. I remember hacking into a system owned by the Bank of New York because you could go online, get a list of everyone who was online, their usernames, and this was through Telenet. I say online. It was Telenet, which was kind of like a server where corporate mainframes were all linked together. And people's passwords were the same as their usernames. So things like that, anyway, stuff like that was common. And there wasn't a whole lot of security. I remember there were two online services. There was CompuServe and The Source. You could hack into The Source by logging into a demo account, then hitting the break key a whole bunch of times, and it would just choke and stop running the demo, and you'd be on an infinite account. Things like that. No one really knew a lot about computer security or telephone security back then.
And by the time OSUNY comes up, phone phreaking to some extent, phone phreaking to that level, what's up with the phone system, what can we do on the phone system, is at least 20 years old by then. Did you have a sense of tradition, or was it just, it was a new thing?
It was a new thing. What appealed to me was, hey, I can make free phone calls. And I'm meeting these people from all over the place who I want to talk to on the phone. And so I'll make free phone calls to them, and I'll share the information that I have. I was far more paranoid then than I am now, even though there's probably less to be paranoid about. There wasn't anything in the way of computer hacker law. I certainly had my run-ins with various federal and corporate security personnel, which we can get to later, but there wasn't a whole lot out there.
Now, where did you get the ideas for the structure of the BBS?
You mean how the software was laid out, or what to include?
You're like, I gotta write a BBS.
Right.
How did you start that?
I knew what I wanted a BBS to do based on this our BBS package. I knew I wanted to have a message area, and then I came up with this idea of maybe having different areas for different types of messages. And I don't know if anyone had ever really done that before. I mean, of course, it's common these days, but it was this idea that, maybe different people will want to talk about different subjects, and I think we just call them subject areas or areas or something like that. And so I realized I could tag each message with an area number, and so I did that, and you could select which area you wanted. I wanted it to be really easy to use. I didn't like the BBSs, which as they were sending line by line of data at 300 or 1200 baud, you were stuck there. You couldn't hit another key. So I made my software so you could do that. Menus were simple. Everything was straightforward. It was really clean, and it was fast. Learned about things like binary searches and figured, I can use that, I'll make my message database really fast. I'm still 16, so it's not like I had deep theory in this, but it just made sense to me. So anyway, that's what really led to the structure, and it certainly changed over the years through use. But it was just, it started with a good plan, and it evolved somewhat until the day that we decided to change to a Citadel system.
What makes you decide to go to Citadel?
I think it was advances in what other people were doing with BBSs, and then rooms became the norm, and everyone was going to different rooms, and Citadel had this nice command line structure and everything. I also didn't spend a lot of time doing the programming at that point. I was maybe in my first year of college then, and I'm trying to think. No, I had it running on my own then still, but it was just a kind of progressive transition with what we were seeing other BBSs do, I think, more than anything.
Was it a big surprise to everyone that you switched software? Or was it natural?
I don't think it was that big of a surprise. I think that it was just kind of a transition, and there were a number of times when we needed to kind of remove and restart our message databases. And that was for various reasons. Sometimes it was for a legal reason. Sometimes it could have been because the file got corrupted. There were different reasons.
The BBS runs into, or people in the BBS run into legal trouble in the early years of this.
Right.
Whatever. Would you characterize the run-ins as being being significantly different than, say, the busts of the 90s, the FBI busts?
Oh yeah, entirely. Back then, no one knew what they were doing with, that is, the authorities didn't really know what they were doing because, like hacking into a computer, what kind of crime is that? What did they steal, It's not like they had something physical. And then the whole idea of someone breaking into a computer and not doing anything. Not taking, not trying to transfer funds or anything, but just for the sake of doing it or to say, I was here. That was totally so far out there, both conceptually, it being a virtual medium, and from a mentality perspective, why would someone do this? I think the authorities were really unprepared. Phone phreaking was a little different because, theft of services. Someone's making phone calls for free. That's not that new. People clip into phone lines and damage pay phones and things like that. So that wasn't that new. But the whole computer hacking thing, there was such a lack of awareness, and I think something that really got people on their feet was the movie War Games. It got on a corporate level, I imagine executives concerned, hey, could that happen to our computer? And all of a sudden, you had SYSOP saying, oh, well, I never changed my SYSOP password. I mean, if you logged onto a Prime computer, probably half of them, you could log onto a SYSOP account by typing the username system, and the password was either system or SYSOP or something like that. There were like 5 standard ones, and no one bothered to change them. So the answer was, well, yeah, it could happen big time to our system. We didn't think anyone would ever try to access our system. So after that movie, things really tightened up. It was amazing.
Did you have any reaction personally to war games?
I thought it was neat because some of the tricks they showed in it were technically valid. Anything from that payphone trick on old payphones, you could kind of short out the microphone and you'd really get a dial tone, to recording touch tones and playing them back. Things like that were valid. I mean, obviously some of it was Hollywood stuff, but the whole idea of computer hacking, breaking into computers, yeah, you could do that. That was real. And there was also this other aspect. I'd referred more to, more like social engineering, where in order to access a computer, a corporate computer or something like that, government computer, well, you didn't have the internet. You didn't just scan for IP addresses. Well, you had to dial up a modem. Well, what's the phone number? Well, I don't know. You could do what they did in war games, just dial, and we would do that. People who were lucky enough to have modems that would auto-dial, you could dial a whole exchange. I mean, it would take days, but you dial until you got tones. No fax machines back then, so if you got a carrier, it was a computer. People who were more brave would go into offices and, I don't know, just pose as someone asking about a job or delivering something or whatever, and note where the computer was, and there's usually an acoustic modem, and there were a couple of phone numbers written down on a mailing label stuck to the top of the thing. Stuff like that.
So, I mean, it sounds like there was a great sense of discovery.
Oh yeah, big adventure factor there. I mean, walking up to like an office building or something after hours and like peering through the window, shining a flashlight in there onto the table where the computer was, trying to read the phone number that someone had scrawled on the front of the modem. Things like that. I mean, it was maybe even a different kind of adventure than you have today, just sitting isolated behind a PC.
What's your thought? The most commonly known version of hackers known now are the kids who run predetermined scripts that someone has until it gets them enough access to change and index.html files so they can make a web page look different.
Yeah.
What's your thoughts about that?
There are different kinds of hackers. There were back then, and I think these days they're not that different, though these days I see more malicious hackers. Back then there were, I guess, 3 kinds. There were people who just wanted to do it to say, I did it. Look, I broke into the bank's computer or whatever. That was an accomplishment. I remember we got access to the White Sands military base computer, and that was like so cool. Not that we wanted to do anything there, but that was just cool. Then there were the people who were malicious, and they'd get into a computer and they'd delete files, and that's what they wanted to do, to show their power. And I think that's, really petty, and I don't know, never saw that side of hacking, never appreciated that side of hacking. And then there are people who do it for personal gain. It's like, hey, I can hack into this, get proprietary information, and then I can use it to my advantage to make money or hurt someone or something like that. And I don't know if I really consider those people even true hackers. I mean, they're criminals, but, you know, steal private documents and then, you know, do that too. That's not why they're hacking, for some other reason. Anyway.
Do you find yourself, did you ever find yourself enmeshed in the whole hacker versus cracker debate?
Elaborate a little bit.
Oh, okay, wow. You know, there's, certainly by 82, 83, the media simply refers to people who break into computers as hackers.
Right.
There's a constant move throughout the 80s and into the 90s and in today to stop them from doing that. To say, well, people who break into computers are crackers. People who hack for the fun of it, they're hackers, call them the right thing in the media. And the media 9 times out of 10 says screw you and calls everyone hackers anyway.
Right.
You know, did you find yourself, it sounds like you're out before that really starts to come to the forefront.
Yeah, that wasn't something that I was involved in.
Was you know, OSUNY gains nationwide fame from Richard Sands' articles.
Yeah.
Do you remember your reaction to it?
I do. I mean, it was pretty amazing that this guy wanted to write things like this. I remember Frank Roberts being all nervous about the whole thing, but excited also. I mean, you know, this guy's going to publicize what we've been doing. And Frank Roberts is, I don't know, he couldn't turn down an opportunity like that, nor would I. So we were excited about it, and gosh, I don't know if I even have the original article still, but I think that revealed to a lot of people what goes on kind of behind closed doors and what hackers are capable of and all that. It was kind of, I don't know, it was kind of skewed because I think it focused on malicious hacking more than anything because of Richard Sands' experience, but it did definitely bring awareness of these kinds of issues into the public eye.
Are you, let's see, I contacted Richard Sands.
Oh.
Yeah. And seeing if I could get an interview with him, and
Yeah.
he's still going back and forth. His biggest fear is that they'll all come after him again. Do you think that's valid?
No, you can tell him that most of them have real jobs and families, and they were 16 and 17-year-olds when, I mean, those were the people who assaulted him. And they're probably embarrassed and trying to figure out how they're going to explain it to their kids. But yeah, I don't think anyone who's active in that sense these days would even think of doing anything to him.
One could speculate that they try to track him down so they can get interviewed too.
Yeah.
More than not.
Yeah.
He indicates a strong regret in ever having anything to have to do with that. And that soon after that, he literally moves and goes to the East Coast and has been there ever since. And
Wow.
has a, you know, he's funny. He mentions how he's not, you know, he doesn't pay any attention, and it's old news and whatever.
Yeah.
And yet, as soon as I started talking to him, he starts whipping up details of things that have gone on and everything else. So I don't know. But those, you know, I'm still trying to convince him to go for it.
That was a long time ago. I remember vaguely sitting at an outdoor cafe in LA talking to him and Frank Roberts, going over details of, you know, what OSUNY was about, what hacking was about, things like that. So yeah, that was certainly a big publicity mark for us, as was the Newsweek article on the 414 hackers. I don't know if you came across that.
Neil Patrick.
That's right. But that also was a prominent mention in the public eye of it was kind of ironic. They openly said, well, we got a lot of these codes and passwords from OSUNY, and no one came after us on that after that huge event. Like no one noticed. It was just amazing.
Were you disappointed?
Well, not really. I think by then I might have had an encounter with an FBI agent, and so.
What does this encounter with an FBI agent change in you?
Well, when you have an FBI agent come to your door and you're 17 years old or something, and I was in high school, and I seem to recall I might have been I was supposed to be in school, and I was cutting classes in the morning or something like that, and comes to the door, and I open it, and he really flips open his badge like they do on TV, Agent such and such, FBI. Anyway, that's enough to startle most 17-year-olds. Anyway, that was about a different hacking issue. Do you want me to go into that now, or?
Well, it's up to you. I mean, what I'm mostly encountering, obviously everything leads back to the BBS, which is what the thing is about, but, the fact that even back then, there were issues with the law.
Yeah.
And what I think, again, I don't know what will come out of the interviews, but you have a situation where you have extremely young kids being pursued by federal agents. And
right.
Federal agents previously only went after,
right.
established guys who were...
I see what you're asking about. I can maybe clarify a little bit about for example, this FBI agent, what his approach was, what he was interested in. He was there because I had hacked into an Environmental Protection Agency computer, and kind of revealed my involvement in it by, I think, kind of ignorantly leaving the phone number for my BBS. But no one, at that time, no one knew that I was necessarily the one who had hacked in. It could have been anyone who hacked in and left the number for the BBS. So that was all right. But what it did is it led the FBI agent to dial up the BBS and see what was there. Anyway, he didn't know quite what to do with it, because here's this plethora of information which he knows is illegal, it shouldn't be here, or it seems like it should be illegal. And if it were people's credit card numbers or something, there would be laws to deal with it. But he didn't know what to do with it. So he sat down and he talked to me, and basically, I think he visited twice. The first time was just to find out who I was, and he was probably surprised I was 17 years old running this thing. The second time, to find out more details, and I remember he was really a very nice guy, and he didn't know what to do with it, and finally just left me with a warning, and he said, "Alan, be careful," and he left. And that was, there weren't laws to deal with computer crime back then, and that was the same thing I found again and again. You'd have security agents from AT&T or ITT or something call up and say, well, we have all these phone records of people calling your BBS, your phone number, illegally using these codes, and we think you should pay for it. And I was like, well, I didn't make the calls, and they recognized that, and again, it was like, well, whatever you're doing something wrong, stop it. But they didn't know what to do with that information. So that was kind of the attitude towards it back then. There just weren't structures in place, legal structures or procedural structures to deal with it. But that did change after the movie War Games.
Neil Patrick, actually, the two funny things that happened is, first of all, the press reports that Neil Patrick and the 414s are inspired by the War Games. But on the timeline and he's on the cover of Newsweek.
Right, right.
And then it gets kind of quiet. I know he moved to BU and went to Boston University for a while and everything. I'm trying to find him, but it was very clear to me that they simply assumed that it's been inspired by Oregon to immediately go out and start computer hacking, and that was how it was reported.
Interesting.
Yeah, so he, I mean, do you know about the Tom Bindus case?
No, I don't think so.
That's the guy, he's the first computer seizure in 84.
Okay.
There's a phone code on one of his boards. Somebody puts up a credit card number, a phone credit card number, and Pac Bell and some agents come and take his machine.
Wow.
And his lawyer gets on CompuServe and rallies support, and he's able to fight the case and get his machine back. So I'm hoping to interview him.
Great.
Things screwed up and he was on the East Coast while I'm out here, and so what?
Yeah.
But you didn't hear of that case.
No, no.
When did you get away from BBSs? That would help me.
Probably 87, 80, let me think here. Yeah, 87 or 88. That was, OSUNY went through 3 different SYSOPs. Primarily, first started with me. Later on, Frank Roberts came on the scene. He and I operated it. Milo Phone Bill was kind of a remote SYSOP, and Tom Tone was a remote SYSOP. As I guess was maybe 86 or so, Frank Roberts did most of the work on it. We had transitioned to a Citadel board, and then I might get this wrong, but I think it was probably 88. I passed it on to Seth, the Joker, and for a while I lent him the equipment for it, all the original stuff, and eventually I think he got his own computer equipment or something like that, and he continued it. So that was its evolution, and I didn't follow it a lot after that. From time to time I would, call up Seth or run into him or something and say, how's it going? But I was doing other stuff.
Why do you think he ran it for so long?
There's this character or characteristic of BBSs that they provide kind of this virtual reality for people, and it sucks us in. It's a social forum without having to deal with the face-to-face contact that's so scary for a lot of people, especially a lot of the people who were into computers back then. Shy, introverted, kind of nerdish, very nerdish. Face-to-face, I don't think so. But this was a way they could communicate with other people, have relationships, and also feel powerful in their world. I can hack into this machine, I can hack into that machine, I can gain respect, people think I'm important. So that was kind of the draw of BBSs. And looking back, I see in myself and other people, it would really suck us in, and we would kind of, a little bit at a time, cast away other aspects of everyday life, responsibilities and obligations, and all we cared about was the BBS. I'm sure you've run into lots of people who got sucked in, and some who it really impacted their life in a big way.
Did you see a change, or while we paid attention, did you see a change in the state of phone phreaking as a subculture?
Oh yeah. As one of the things that prompted me to kind of lose an interest in it was the consequences got a lot harsher. There were now laws in place There were minimum consequences, fines, imprisonment, things like that. There were procedures for prosecuting phone phreaks and hackers. And it got really scary really fast when this stuff came up. And it wasn't just a be careful. It was, you're now going to court, possibly spending time in jail and being fined thousands of dollars or tens of thousands of dollars. I mean, this is serious. So when that became a reality, I got less involved in it. It also became, how do I say it? It was a different kind of challenge. Whereas before there was a lot of ingenuity in terms of thinking of different ways of hacking, it turned into something more mechanical for phone phreaking, like, I don't know, copying numbers off people's credit cards, or just kind of like generic phone frauds, signing up for credit cards and with a fake address or something like that. I mean, there wasn't like real ingenuity in it or cleverness. It was like, well, it's like going into the trash pile of a store and pulling out credit card receipts and buying stuff with people's credit card numbers. I mean, there just wasn't that kind of challenge that there had been. It was just figuring out what these 10-digit numbers were for phone phreaking, in terms of just free calls. What else? The introduction of ESS, electronic switching systems, made blue boxes and black boxes obsolete. The red boxes did still work. You could still fake a payphone into giving you a free call, and for all I know, you still can, but in some places.
Certainly in Canada, it still works.
Yeah.
And, I know people are using it well into 93, 94.
Wow.
Pretty much. So red boxes for some reason.
Right.
It's too much work to fix it. Now they're all becoming third-party payphones.
Right.
So it's becoming less.
Yeah.
It's basically the cell phones have changed it. The reasons for payphones and call boxes go away.
Right.
When everyone has one.
Makes sense. One thing I remember, just an example of the kinds of older technology things we could do. I remember you could dial a certain phone number. I think it started with 660. It would put you onto a phone company test computer. You dial an area code 660 and then like any 4 digits. It would put you on a phone company test system, and it was a no-charge call. Well, if you got onto the system and you had a phone that had that fourth row of keys, the A, B, C, D, or if you wired up your regular touch-tone phone so you could switch the last column, like that was one of the text files I remember we had online. So you could switch that last column and your pound key would become a D key. Well, you dial up this phone number and you hit the D key, you get hooked to one side of a circuit. Now, if someone else called from anywhere else in the country, the same phone number, and hit that key, they'd get hooked to the other side of the circuit and you could talk to each other. And it was kind of neat figuring things like that out.
Loops come to mind.
Yeah, exactly.
I think we made a silver box.
Silver box, that's right. Yeah.
That's a question worth asking. I run textfiles.com. I don't know if you've been there.
Don't think so.
Oh, I've got 45,000 BBS era text files.
Okay.
That's my first, bit of fame as a historian.
Okay.
It's because in 98 I just started putting up all these text files, like just everything, from like Apple's Eura to all the way up.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the things, obviously, once you put that many files on, you start seeing trends. And one seems to be that it's like candy when it comes to box plans. Like it's just something about that mentally makes people want to have the
It's because what you just said there, it's a thing. Everything else, for the most part, that hackers generally deal with is information, not things. Having something tangible is very different to us from a psychological perspective than just having information. And I think being able to have a physical thing divides hackers into different groups. There are many, probably most hackers these days, who are just information hackers. And it's something very unique to have this physical magic thing, as you said, that can do stuff for you.
Certainly, I mean, a lot of the boxes are created by about 86. So were you around for the PK zip versus ARC war?
Yeah, I remember using both. I remember everything was ARC, and then PK zip slowly came onto the scene, all that, yeah.
Do you remember the whole lawsuit, the fight?
I have some vague notion of it. I don't know details of it,
So
though.
you don't have any impression of that?
No.
I mean, what finally gets you out of, you run OSUNY for many years. Were there other BBSs you called?
Yeah, there were some of them. Let's see. Gosh, if I could remember some of the names. Mostly TRS-80 BBSs back then, like Modem over Manhattan, and what was another one? You mentioned one recently in Manhattan. I'm trying to remember the name, though.
It was 8 BBS.
8 BBS was one of them. No, I never did much with that, though. I think I was aware of it.
World of Crichton, Elite.
No.
Blotto Land.
Yeah, I remember that. There were a couple of good ones, mostly in New York City, but not too many. Especially back when I was doing OSUNY. I mean, hacking was there were little, like, you could count on 3 fingers the number of other BBSs that openly dealt with hacking. So that was part of it too.
You ever bumped any Green Machine BBSs?
No, I don't think so.
Green Machine, was fair to say. I tracked him down and interviewed him, and it was one of these things. Green Machine was another TRS-80 software around 1980 that he ran. And so I tracked him down and interviewed him, and I'm the only person to have ever video interviewed him. I get the impression I'm the only person to have video interviewed you.
Let me think. I'd been interviewed, this is the first time I've been really interviewed about the whole OSUNY thing. I mean, other than, talking to various magazine people. And then there was a book that had a chapter where I appeared to not really have any involvement in it. It was about a different aspect of my work with computers, so that was fine too. But yeah.
There is this sort of, it happens again now in the last 5 years, but from 83, or no, even 82, maybe 82 to 85, there's this real madness on the part of the mass media about hacking and the concept of the hacker.
Yeah.
And you start to see a couple rip-off hacker movies show up, and Square Pegs shows up. There was a Matthew Levitro film, Matthew Levitro series, like about nerds, whose name I'm totally forgetting. It's and it's about a computer hacker type, and he's in it. Once the mass media gets a hold of your subculture, do you remember what your feelings were about that?
Yeah, I thought it was neat. It was like, hey, people know who we are. Remember going back to the kind of what's in it for me interest of your typical hacker. It's make me feel important. I want to be someone. And so when the media grabs a hold of it, it's like, yeah. And I mean, some hackers got attention in more positive ways. The people who were just like, hey, I was there. And then there were the people who deleted files, and I mean, that's kind of bogus. It's, it's like writing a virus or something. Well, great, I mean, you can burn down a supermarket too. You'll get media attention and hurt people, all right? So.
Do you remember the January losers?
No, I think that was after my time.
The wave of kids that would come every Christmas after they got their modems?
Oh, I see what you're saying. I remember, these waves of kind of newbies who thought that, hey, I've got this modem and I'm going to do all these great things, and they get bored, I guess. I don't.
I think it's like 83 or 84. That's the January that never ends, because modems suddenly take off to the point that, well, now they're just pretty much always here.
Yeah.
In the internet, it's the September that never ended, because in the internet, it was based that every September all the kids who entered college suddenly had internet accounts.
Yeah.
Did you ever, I don't know how much of the internet you use.
A lot.
You do?
Yeah.
Do you see anything that reminds you of your BBS days?
Yes and no. I mean, I see kind of hackers of today. It's kind of ironic. Each time my firewall pops up a warning telling me someone's trying to hack into my computer, I suppose I probably deserve it. But I see the same kinds of things, people wanting to hack in, but there's less cleverness. Again, well, there probably is that cleverness, but there's so much of it, we're inundated with so many hackers that it's not evident. Like when someone sets their computer to scan IP addresses or something like that, there's no finesse in that. When a hacker is trying to figure out the password for a corporate computer, based on knowing the name and the husband's name and the kid's name of the person who uses it and birthdays, and trying to piece things together, and then succeeds figuring out, oh, it was the last 4 digits of her phone number reversed, followed by her son's middle name. I mean, there's like a certain sleuth aspect in there. Whereas it's different when it's just like, oh, well, I downloaded this, IP scanning program and I tell it to run and it just does it, and it sometimes gives me access to people's computers. I don't know how it works. That's different. And I'm sure there are those ingenious hackers these days. But I guess we just don't, it's just not that evident because we're so inundated with people trying to access our computers in those ways. And then there's the whole virus culture and all that. I mean, and that, again, that's malicious. And so I have little respect for people who do that. And it's not even a new thing. I mean, you might remember the book, The Adolescence of P1. I mean, what was that, back in the early 70s or maybe something like that?
Yep.
I mean, it was a virus. It wasn't malicious, but it was, well, I guess it was a Trojan horse, but it was, anyway, way back then, the ideas were there, but it's the attitudes. In your travels, do you ever remember running into another BBS or BBSs where you just said, yeah, this is why these things were invented, Why BBS?
Why BBS this is what a BBS was put on the earth for.
No, not really. Back then it was just fun. Not much big picture perspective on things like that.
Oh, but even okay, then I can give you a different feel. In other words, the one where you were like, you're running this really popular BBS.
Yeah.
Was there any other BBS that, while everyone else is trying desperately to get onto your BBS,
Oh, okay.
you're like, I want to get on this one over here. Is there anything like that?
Not really. Not for me. I mean, there were other quality BBSs out there. There are hacker BBSs. worthwhile BBSs. For me personally, it was neat that as soon as the connection light would go out on my modem, within seconds it would light up again. Someone else was dialing in, 24 hours a day. There was always a time that someone was dialing, someone's auto dialer was going at it. That was neat, and that really became the focus. It was my BBS, the people associated with it. I didn't really have much opportunity to go elsewhere, to be honest. One modem, one phone line, didn't have multiple connections back then.
As a SYSOP, did you think, looking back, that you had a style?
Yeah, kind of a professional, hands-off style. I would read a lot. I read everything, all the messages that came through. I would occasionally respond to something that I thought was really good, but most of it I let go by, other than noticing people who put up particularly good information in messages, and then at some point I would hit the C key and go chat with them and say, hi, are you interested in maybe getting more involved with the system, maybe writing a text file or something like that. And that's how I'd solicit information. Most people were really willing and thought it was just the coolest thing to be able to have what they wrote in a more permanent form. It wasn't just a message. It was something that wouldn't go away in, however many days, wouldn't expire.
Now, if you are being rather quiet and only responding perfectly, did you notice any sort of a speculative culture rising up over you? Were they like, we gotta find, for a long time, for a lot of us, the big joke was trying to find Frank Roberts' real name.
Right.
Because the phone number, I think the phone number that OSUNY was on was registered to a Dell A-Sit, so that it would say Citadel in the phone book.
Oh, yeah.
And, I remember the big deal on one of the conferences was that they found this picture. They went after the yearbooks of every high school that was near him to try to find his picture. That's how they finally were able to,
From a high school yearbook?
Yeah, I think that's what it was, and as they say, to drop his ducks, to be able to know who he was. But he was, he was the mysterious one who wouldn't talk. And he was that way at the meetings too, the OSUNY meetings in the Galleria. Yeah. He was very quiet. Did you ever make it to any of those meetings?
I don't remember. If I did, it was probably just one of them. Regarding Frank Roberts, I remember one of the funniest things, and he'll probably tell you this, but like years later, he got married as a family and all that, and one day he's walking somewhere with his wife, and someone comes up to him, Frank Roberts, and he stands for a moment, look at his wife, look at this person who maybe he vaguely recommends, and says, yes. And his wife looks at him, John. And probably a really classic moment, but anyway, we're digressing. So,
I like to hear those stories.
Yeah.
He was unusually protective of his identity.
Yeah.
Did you find yourself trying to do that as well?
Well, I did. I never used my name. No one knew who I was, but I would present myself as SYSOP and occasionally as Paul Snyder, other than the people who were more intimately involved with OSUNY, very few people sought to know what my real identity was. Either that or maybe they thought they knew. That was a possibility originally when we had the phone line. What was it? 914-725-4060. I picked a number that would be like a nice pattern on the touch-tone keypad, and they said, well, what name do you want it listed under? And I was like, oh, I don't know. And I asked about having it unlisted, and it cost like an extra $2 a month to have it unlisted. I was like, well, I'm not doing that. So I thought about it and I said, oh, I'll have it listed under a name that's really common. So I used the last name, I think it was Brown. And if you look in, the phone book for that area of New York, well, you'd probably find 20 Browns, and it was something like, R. Brown. I was like, well, who's that? And it didn't have an address. So the idea was to throw people off if they thought that they had any idea. Like if someone had access to what was it? I forget the abbreviation, but there were certain systems where you could punch in someone's phone number and it would tell you who it was registered to.
Customer name and address.
Yeah, CNA, that's right. And I mean, that was, if you had access to such a system, I mean, that was amazing back then. But it would come up with this bogus information, and you thought you had something really key there, so that was neat.
Okay, that's the first tape.
Okay.
So the question is, are you up for some more questions, or?
Sure, I'll take a bathroom break and a lunch break, I think,
All right.
if you don't mind.
I'll